I am a big fan of the Halo Odyssey desk, but with a cost of thousands of dollars, I went looking for how to do something similar for a lot less money. Let's go through how I created my version. The main part of replicating the desk for me was the racks to either side. I didn't and still really don't know how to sink it into the desk, so I went with a desktop model. I had some length of 1x4 lumber, so a basic square frame seemed like the logical place to start. I started by going to Amazon to order the rails. Since I decided on an 8U rack rail, which had a length of 14 inches, I used those dimensions to create the rough height of the frame that would hold those rails. I made the initial cuts a little larger than what I thought the final dimensions would be, and then attached the rails. Next, I put in a piece of gear in each of the top and bottom positions, giving me a rough box with a bit of play. I then used clamps to hold the top and bottom pieces in place. This allowed me to set the specific length of the top board. I then duplicated that for the bottom. To complete the sides, I just made sure there was a bit of extra space on the top and bottom of the rail, measured and cut the boards to that size. I attached the top and bottom pieces with glue and screws. You could also use brad nails, but I didn't have that at the time. I now had a frame that I could attach my gear to and carry around. However, it wasn't very useful yet for placing on the desktop. What I needed was a container to hold the frame. To get the sides, I took the empty rack and I began leaning it on my desk using clamps and pieces of scrap wood. That allowed me to sit at my desk, get the feel for how it would work in practice. Once I was happy with the angle, I used a piece of poster board to trace out the angle of the frame. Then I removed the poster board and just outlined a shape that I thought would work. I knew I wanted a spot for my studio monitors, so I took that into account. Once I was happy with the outline, I cut it out and then kind of dry fit it so that I could get a better idea of the overall look. With that completed, I then took that template, drew it onto my plywood, and using a mixture of circular saw and jigsaw, cut out the two side panels. This is where a table saw would come in super handy. Once again, using clamps, I could see the finished product for the first time. I really liked it, and so I was on to actually finishing. I initially was just going to paint it and then bolt it on, but I had borrowed a router from my father-in-law, so once I had the pieces laid out to get painted, I decided to carve out a little bit to help it sit into the side panel better. That part is optional, but I think it helps stabilize the overall structure. I chose the depth randomly by looking at the layers of plywood and picking one. Now with the frame in place, I drilled a couple of holes in the side for the bolts to go through. I used T-nuts on the inside to bite into the frame and hold everything solid. I didn't actually measure these, rather I marked out the rails, then marked a reasonable spot for each. Then I drilled them out and put in the bolts. To finish this off, I used a board to span the distance in the back to hold what is currently one pair of studio monitors. You can just screw or nail them in, but in my case I used dowels so I could take them apart. A PVC collar and some rubber matting, and I had my monitor stand. For options, I used shelf pins so I could have two shelves since I don't have much gear yet. That way I can get my non-rack mounted interface and the tube amp into the rack. The second shelf holds my MIDI controller. I put rubber feet on the bottom so that they wouldn't move around or damage the desktop. I also am in the process of adding RGB lighting to the back of the racks, but I'll do a video on that later. In my second rack, I used some scrap to make a place for my mixer. So there you go, a way to get a passable desktop rack relatively cheap. I was able to do this for close to $50 a piece. Depending on the materials you already have on hand, it could be even cheaper. You can see the description below for a link to my Sketchup plan and the materials I used. If you find this useful in your studio, I'd love to see photos. Take it easy, everyone.